speaking of messaging, our next speaker is a person that always leaves me smiling, always leaves me full of hope that there's a better future, and a person that truly understands for our messaging to work, it has to be as much about heart as it is intellect. Our next speaker, I just love to death.
Well, thank you very much for the introduction. And what I'm going to do today, kind of different than everybody else, I'm going to paint a picture by telling a story, my story. I actually live in the inner city, so I face this challenge every day. So before we can move forward, we actually have to go back. And that's what I'm going to do, go back, give you a little history. President Lincoln issued the Emancipation Proclamation on September 22nd, 1862, freeing enslaved people in the Confederacy. My great grandfather was born 1876, just 14 years from the Emancipation Proclamation. He died in 1944 before I was born. My great grandmother was born in 1895, just 33 years from the Emancipation Proclamation. She died in 1970 when I was 14 years old. It's weird to think that somebody with just 33 years removed from slavery was in my orbit. My father's in the military, and we traveled back and forth in the summers and spent time with great grandmothers, a host of aunties, uncles, and cousins. My relatives and neighbors owned their own homes, farms, and businesses. That's when I was growing up. Within our communities, we were not only janitors, cooks, waiters, gardeners, construction workers, farm laborers, but also college educated teachers, doctors, lawyers, mechanics, plumbers, engineers, electricians, and the list goes on and on. These are examples that I had as a kid. Homelessness, gang activity, drugs, gun, illiteracy, teen pregnancy, dropout, and abortion were virtually non-existent. If a girl did get pregnant, big mama, sister girl, or auntie stepped in to help her raise that child while she was allowed to finish her schooling. Shooting of kids and innocents was unheard of and would not have been tolerated in our community. The only thing I can remember as a child was that maybe we had a few white winos and even they had a refuge at night. My great grandparents, great grandmother, and parents grew up in the segregated South, where they had systematic racism and institutional racism, where the KKK, Jim Crow laws, white only restrooms and restaurants, and colored section transportation system was strictly enforced. Attending the school of your choice was not an option. I lived in a portion of my childhood in the segregated house. And even though my father was in the military and we lived on a military base next to people of every nationality, when it was time to go to school, white kids went to their self-appointed neighborhood schools. Black kids were bused to colored only schools miles away from home. I remember going over a large river and crossing the railroad tracks before we arrived at our substandard classroom with outdated books. Our schools were substandard, but our teachers were not. No excuses were tolerated because of substandard conditions. You were taught and learned not only book knowledge, but skills that prepared you for life. My great grandparents, grandmother, and parents grew up in what was a lynching capital of America. Just one story that was repeated many times in Black communities. A couple of Black, which you should know about, which is prevalent in our communities. A couple of Black boys who were cousins were spotted at a pond with a couple of white girls, just innocent, fun, but that was not allowed. That night, and this was in my parents' neighborhood, that night, men in white hoods showed up in the neighborhood and demanded these cousins be turned over to them as they would burn the neighborhood down. Imagine the pure terror of these children as they were driven away to their certain deaths and the pain and anguish the mothers and of the community that had to turn them over. That night, they were tortured and killed, these young boys, and that wasn't enough. They then took these kids back to their neighborhoods so the colors would not forget that they weren't allowed to be with white girls, okay? They tied their bodies to the back of trucks and dragged them through the gravel street and neighborhood until the pieces of bodies just were shredded. No one was arrested or faced any earthly consequences. Wallowing in sorrow was not allowed. There was no safe spaces. That night, there was no burning, looting, or murdering in your neighborhood. The next morning, these same Black men and women had to cover up their pain and through their faith, strength, and courage, get up and guess what? Go to work. My grandmother only had one child, my mother. After graduating high school, my grandmother moved to New York to pursue her career in nursing and eventually establish a home for herself and her mother. She graduated from college, becoming an RN, and eventually became head nurse of the ICU pediatric ward at one of New York's largest hospitals. Just imagine the systematic racism that my grandmother had to deal with being Black in New York and being told every day that she would never be able to become a nurse. If she wanted to work in a hospital, it was going to be changing bedpans. She never faltered. There was no quit in her. Her drive and ambition and was instilled in her at a young age, and she believed that she could do anything she wanted and be anybody she wanted to be. She had an inner strength that came from a strong family foundation and faith in God, and that was passed on to all of us. My father came from a family of 11 children and had 20 plus years military experience. My mother was a teacher. Together, they raised 5 children. All are productive citizens in their communities, 4 having college degree, and 1 having distinguished military career. Together, they have 11 grandchildren, only and 1 is Olympian, and 1 has served in Afghanistan. On his return, he received his bachelor's degree and is now an officer in the military. My parents were married in 1950. 2020 was their 70th wedding anniversary. That was last year. Due to the COVID lockdown, we had to cancel our planned celebration, but happy to report at 89 years young, they are still going strong. You asked me why I'm telling you all of this. Because my family was a typical family. This is what Black families look like. They look like what I just told you. President Lyndon Johnson was terrified of Black Americans getting the vote and the power they would possess. So a plan was hatched to help us, the War on Poverty, the Economic Opportunity Act, which provided $1 billion to the inner cities. It is estimated over the last 50 years, $20 trillion have gone to inner cities. Can someone tell me what happened to the money and why do a lot of these inner cities look worse than third world countries? Under LBJ's plan, in order for women to receive these welfare benefits, the man had to leave the household. Women took the money and we sold our soul for 30 pieces of silver. The so-called war on poverty started the demise and decimation of the Black family. The government replaced the Black fathers. In the last 50 years, violence, drug abuse, and gangs are now rampant in inner cities, with economic and educational opportunity virtually non-existent. Approximately 400,000 Black people have killed each other over the last 50 years. Abortion of Black babies since Roe v. Wade have exterminated over 20 million Black babies. There are approximately only 38 million Blacks left in the United States. Without violence and abortion, our numbers could easily be 80 to 100 million. We're at 38 million and diminishing. We cannot do anything to retrieve these souls lost. We can only start for where we are today, saving and taking back our families. In 1619, the first Black Africans arrived on the shores of America. Though they endured unspeakable torture in learning how to read, they learned how to read anyway. They understood that education was a key to success in the New World. Not only did they survive, but they thrived. From 1845 to 1980, Black Americans invented many of the current conveniences that you have today. Blacks were scientists, mathematicians, and inventors in this nation. Kathleen Johnson, one of NASA's human computers, was instrumental in successfully sending a man to space with a chalkboard and a piece of chalk. Before the 1960s, approximately 85 to 90% of Black families were two-family households. The majority were God-fearing. The family, the church, the schools all work together to create strong communities. Today, 75 to 80% of Black children are born to single moms. The breakdown of the Black family structure has collapsed our educational system, which was once second to none. Why is my focus on Black youth? Because Black boys in California are one of the most educationally disadvantaged groups in this government-run schools. Here's some of the statistics, and this should be unacceptable to everybody. 80 to 90% of Black boys in California, when they graduate, don't meet reading, writing, English, or math standards. A large portion of these kids will end up on welfare, homeless, and in jail. If you cannot read or write, okay, you cannot take advantage of any opportunity, you can't get jobs. 60% of juvenile delinquents and 80% of adult inmates are illiterate. 48% of Black males in California do not even finish high school. California Black students are twice as likely as white students to be identified as learning disabilities and more likely to identify for special education in general. The California school system ranks 47th out of 50 states for quality education attainment, despite California teachers being among the highest paid in the nation. I see school choice as a new beginning, as a pathway to stability and to start recapturing our greatness as Black Americans. Through education, we can once again stand on the shoulders of our ancestral greats. Since the church has been such an integral part of our past victories, we need the pastors to take an active role in this rebuilding process. building an educational structure centered around God and the traditional family. Also, we can look at adopting a community and also have affluent schools partnering with inner city schools. In conclusion, Black American youth have been decimated by the breakdown of the family unit. They have no pride in history that they don't know about or don't understand or have no connection to. They have no sense of purpose or hope. Some of our inner city children have never experienced optimism. In yesteryear, our freedom was built on strong families and our reliance on God and not the government. Our faith in God was unwavering and our minds continued to flourish. Our parents would not let us feel sorry for ourselves. Whatever life blows dealt us, the next day we got up and went to work. No safe spaces and no excuses. Cities across the nation are writing resolutions declaring racism a health crisis and the civil rights crisis of this generation. It is not. The current civil rights issue is generation is a desecration of Black families and the church and the lack of educational and economic opportunities and all the death and destruction that has come along with the breakdown of a culture. Resolutions are for people that don't want to do any work. In the words of Frederick Douglass, it is easier to build strong children than to prepare or repair broken men. So goes a family, so goes societies. People may be looking behind me and see that woman that was behind me right now. That is that great grandmother I was talking about. The photo in the background, one of the only photos we have of my great grandmother, a businesswoman and an entrepreneur with no formal education. She is standing in front of a neighborhood grocery store that she owned, next door to a house that she built and land that she owned, and a street that she purchased multiple other lots. That's why we need school choice to get us back to some semblance of graceness that has been lost over the last 50 years. Thank you very much for the opportunity to speak to you.
Wow. Thank you, Miss Ashley. Inspiring words, as always. God bless you, ma'am. Just God bless you.